Rogers. He is in Detroit. Mr. Chairman, if this thing gets any worse, and if it blows, I mean, it could set off turmoil all across this region. Is there anything we could be or should be doing right now, in your view?
Well, I think obviously we need to play an important role to try to calm the violence that's growing there. We need to be able to, I think, use American influence so that we can make a very clear distinction between the Muslim Brotherhood, who is using democracy to take away women's rights, to take away religious freedom, and what we hope happens is the secular political movement has an opportunity to take root, which is exactly what didn't happen, and there was candidly no U.S. influence used there. And the secular folks who caused the whole uprising to begin with said, hey, wait a minute, Morsi was very active in taking away our rights using an election to do it. And so we've got to sort that out. We've got to try to calm things down. And for Americans at home are saying, well, why should we be interested? 5% of the world's oil every single day goes through the Suez Canal, about 8% of the world trade. So if this spills over and they lose control of Egypt, it will have real economic impacts for us at home. And clearly, it's to the benefit of the entire region and world and the United States' interest to have a calm and a sustained, I think, democracy grow in Egypt.
This has sort of overshadowed the civil war that continues to rage in Syria. Is there anything to be hopeful about there in that situation?
We are certainly playing for our best, worst option at this point. And again, here's another case where almost 2 years go by, no U.S. real stepping up to our allies' call to get involved. And I'm not talking about boots on the ground, just strong U.S. leadership and bringing special capabilities to this particular problem. But now you've got terrorist groups who are fighting even amongst themselves as they see that this thing is deteriorating in Syria badly. You have Iran using this as a proxy fight. The Russians are still there. Hezbollah, the terrorist organization. You have Iraq now, the Al-Qaeda in Iraq now saying it's not just Al-Qaeda in Iraq, it's Al-Qaeda in the Levant. And it's all playing out in this cauldron called Syria. And it's putting pressure on all our regional allies there, the Arab League. I have to tell you, Bob, you could not draw up a worse scenario to try to solve than what we're seeing unfold in Syria, and the growing threat from these terrorist groups who now seem to think that there is real hope for a safe haven in Syria when Assad falls.
Let's talk a little bit about this controversy that continues to build about the National Security Agency and its efforts to put off a terrorist attack on this country, to stave off one. You saw in the House last week, the House almost voted to severely rein in what the National Security Agency is doing, claiming they are invading the privacy of Americans because they keep this large store of telephone numbers here in this country, which they say they need to have so when they intercept calls from terrorists in other countries, they can check it against this list of phone numbers they have. Have they harmed the privacy, or have they invaded our privacy, in your view, Mr. Chairman?
I don't believe they have. And here's the problem. So you have this collision of really bad ideas and federal government overreach when it comes to the IRS and this new data hub that they're trying to bring all your sensitive personal information on one side of the federal government. And I have real strong concerns about that as well. This is very, very different. And remember, this came about after 9/11, when we found out afterward that terrorists that we knew about overseas had called somebody who was a terrorist but living in the United States or staying in the United States. He ended up being the person that got on an airplane and flew into the side of the Pentagon. We said that gap, that hole that we don't have the ability to say, who is that person talking to in the United States? We need to fill it. So here's what they did. They said, hey, let's, this is the intelligence community, let's take these phone numbers. These are records that the phone company already has. And it's a billing record, just to from, no names and no addresses, and let's just hold them in a place, have very strict requirements that it has to have a counterterrorism nexus to even put a phone number in, so we could determine who is this terrorist overseas talking to. Again, even if they put the number in, Bob, when a number comes out, there's no name or no address to it. And that's why there's 0 privacy violations on this in its entire length of the program, and 54 disrupted terrorist plots. You know, it's overseen by the court, by the legislature, and the executive branch. No other program has this much scrutiny with very little information. There's more information in a phone book than there is in this particular big pile of phone numbers that we used to close the gap. We, the intelligence services, closed the gap that we saw didn't allow us to catch someone from 9/11.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Chairman. What would happen if they stopped doing this, if they stopped collecting these phone numbers and storing them there where they can check them against these terrorist calls? What, in your view, would happen?
Well, we are going to miss something, and exactly what happened on 9/11. What happened on 9/11 is a known terrorist safe house calls in to the United States to talk to a terrorist who is living amongst us. We will miss that. We'll miss that connection between what's happening here and overseas. And remember, terrorists now use the same communication systems in America that we do, so they're intermingled with us, which makes it incredibly, incredibly difficult. What you're doing is taking away the one tool that we know will allow us to nexus between a foreign terrorist overseas talking to somebody in the United States. That's how they stopped the bombing in New York from 3 people with bombs in backpacks from getting on the subway system. It has saved real lives. I mean, real folks have come home with their legs. Real folks have not been their lives taken when they're commuting to work because of this program. That's why I get really nervous. But I understand why people are nervous, Bob. All of these bad ideas have collided, and this was the first opportunity, at least in the House, for people to express their anger about all of this other information that's being collected. I think we have to separate them and understand the difference.
Do you think that even members of Congress know what they're voting on when they vote on this? Because I have heard from some members of Congress, I've been told they have asked members of the intelligence community to show them the dossier they've collected on them. They want to hear the tape recordings they have. And as I understand it, they don't have anything of that nature.
You know, that was what was so frustrating to me, and I knew it was going to be a close vote. The day before the vote, people were asking, well, how many of the numbers have recordings attached to them? Well, the answer is 0. If you have to ask that the day before the vote, I knew I was in an education problem here. There are no recordings of phone calls. There are no dossiers. They do not record your emails. None of that was happening. None of it. I mean, 0. And what was happening is they were conflating all of these other problems with this particular problem. And it was concerning. And again, this wasn't about modifying it. This wasn't about fixing it. They were willing to turn it off. And I think that was a dangerous way to do it. I think with a little thought here, we can even add more privacy than is already there. And at the end of the day, if Americans understood that these phone numbers are not being called, they're not being monitored, they're not being surveilled, there's no spying on Americans, I think they'll feel much, much better about it.
All right.
And when, again, that's a pretty impressive record. 0 privacy violations, 54 terrorist attacks that saved real American lives and our allies as well. That's real success.